This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, not hearing anybody unmute. I will, and that's our entire audience is online. So, are there any comments from the directors? I have plenty to say. Okay. Any correspondence received from the public?
No.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go down to section 2, the items for board consideration and possible action. 2A is the groundwater dependent ecosystems technical memo.
Yes, Madam President. As we all recall, one of the Prop 68 projects that's part of $6.1 million allocated to our basin is to evaluate the status and the work done to date all around groundwater dependent ecosystems, focusing on the mesquite bosque.
Depending on what part of
And so that project was kind of one of the first out of the gate, so to speak, between all of them. And actually, Travis and his team at DUC have issued a technical memorandum on its findings. And I think, I don't want to, I guess my version, abbreviated version to explain is basically the first step was to look at the existing data, look to see what has been done so far, and then report on that.
That is typical in research. First, look and see what has been done first.
Yeah, so that has happened and resulted in a technical memo that Travis Huxman sent to me maybe 2 weeks ago. And then Mr. Garman and Travis organized a public meeting to discuss that document. I personally wasn't there. I think some of you were. I think really interesting results, things that we weren't expecting, kind of from the macro scale, that is a significant, maybe significant an understatement, portion of the Bosque was not part of previous studies, and a couple other initial findings. So I think David had always wanted to keep the board involved. I'm sorry, David Garman has always wanted to keep the board involved on the progress of this study, and wanted to take his first opportunity that he could, which would be to share the results of the tech memo, review the public meeting, and then this document was also reviewed at the Water Master, which I think most of us heard, so David can share his experience there. And I guess we could talk about potential next steps. Kind of my plan is to hear what the board feels in terms of future direction, and then maybe come back in the next month or two with a recommendation on how to proceed going forward in terms of making sure that this document gets in the right hands of the parties that can help at least recognize its impact and the significance of it. My version is the Water Masters. It's typical position of, if it's not our study, we can't accept it. I think it's a fairly strong position. So I think, once again, the findings, in my personal opinion, are so significant, it's really difficult to say, yeah, we've been there already, we've looked at that, because a vast geographic portion of the area was not included in previous studies. So let's talk about the tech memo, the public meeting, the Water Master meeting, and then things, like I said, I'll come back in the next month or two with, and working with Steve, because obviously there are some legal implications here, and kind of the definition of the judgment is the technical issue here. So I think I'd like to continue to work with Steve and come back with you in the next month or so. And maybe, Madam President, if you're so inclined, we could appoint an ad hoc committee at some point, either as part of this meeting or in the near future. So there you go, David. There is your introduction. David Garman is here and ready, willing, and able to share what he's experienced in the last month or so. So, David, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing the meeting, but can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great. Well, good morning, Madam President and directors. Thank you for this opportunity just to talk briefly about the technical memorandum. As Jeff just explained, this was our first deliverable as part of the groundwater dependent ecosystem project. So there was a public meeting at the Steel Burnand Research Center on the 27th of March. It looked like there were somewhere between 70 and 80 community members who participated in that meeting. So it was well attended. And the meeting was relatively brief. And the Travis Huxman was one of the presenters, as were the two co-managers of the project, who are Doctors Nikki Fiore and Dr. Laurel Brigham. And these three researchers had taken a deep look at Appendix D4 of the groundwater management plan, because Appendix D4 is the part of the plan that addresses groundwater dependent ecosystems. And D4 makes the assertion that there were once groundwater dependent ecosystems in the Borrego subbasin, but that they had been so degraded by the drawdown of water between the 1950s and roughly 1985, that there were no longer ecosystems in the subbasin that were dependent on groundwater. That was the conclusion of D4. And the scientists from UCI looked at the arguments that were supporting that conclusion and found a number of what they refer to as knowledge gaps. And the first one that Jeff has already alluded to has to do with the map that was used in D4 to describe where the plants associated with the groundwater dependent ecosystem were located. And the problem with the map that was used in D4 is that its mapping of vegetation was limited to the Anza Borrego Desert State Park. That map ends at the political boundary between the state park and what we refer to as Borrego Springs, or the Borrego Springs Community Planning Area, the donut hole in the middle of the park. So the map that was used in D4 did not map any vegetation, did not look at any vegetation in the donut hole. And so that's how the D4 comes up with the conclusion that there's only about 14 acres of potential groundwater dependent ecosystem remaining in the valley. Now, when all of the vegetation is taken into account, as it is by other excellent mapping systems, it turns out that there's another 2,500 acres of mesquite in the donut hole that were simply not looked at by Appendix D4. So that was the first knowledge gap that the researchers discovered when they were analyzing Appendix D4. The second knowledge gap had to do with D4's calculation of mesquite rooting depth and comparing that to estimations of groundwater level. Appendix D4 used a number of 15.3 feet as the rooting depth of mesquite. It is mysterious where that number came from, because it's not substantiated anywhere in the literature, and it was not substantiated by any on-site data. There was on-site data that existed in the literature. A measurement of mesquite bosque near the Borrego sink in 1988 was measured at 39 feet, a little over 39 feet. And the literature contains references to mesquite bosque having roots down to 150 feet. And the second part of this issue has to do with the depth to groundwater. D4 used a number 55 feet as the depth to groundwater below the surface, which means using their rooting depth of 15.3 feet and a groundwater depth of 55 feet, they made the case that mesquite bosk could not be drawing upon groundwater. But when you use the observed rooting depth of nearly 40 feet and using the Watermaster's latest contours and estimates to depth to groundwater, there's a range of 13 feet to over 40 or 50 feet depth to groundwater, which means with using 39 feet and say 13 feet, there's certainly the possibility of significant overlap between mesquite roots and groundwater. The third piece of evidence that D4 uses to assert that there are no groundwater dependent ecosystems uses satellite imagery, which is basically an assessment of greenness and how the greenness of vegetation changes throughout the year in response to precipitation or lack thereof. And D4, by virtue of having not mapped or not looked at 95% of the mesquite bosk, really was in no position to make much of an interpretation of the greenness or lack thereof of the mesquite bosk, of the totality of it. And the scientists also noted that the time frames that D4 used were really not the appropriate time frames to assess whether or not plants were reaching groundwater and using groundwater. D4 was looking at times of year that typically received precipitation, and the time of year that you need to look to see if plants are accessing groundwater is are the times of year when there is not precipitation. And what the scientists at UCI noted is that there was no significant change in greenness in the mesquite bosk during the periods of no precipitation, which is an indicator that they're getting water from somewhere. And since it's not precipitation, it is most likely groundwater. So those were the three areas of knowledge gaps that are described in the technical memorandum. Jeff has it up on your screen. I believe it's included in your packet. And for anybody who wants to visit the Tub Canyon Desert Conservancy website, it's also available there. This information has been presented also to the community sponsor group. And we have sent the technical memorandum to the Watermaster, asking that it be included in their public comment section. The first time we made that request, we were told that the email was lost and not seen in time to be included for public comment. We have sent it back a second time, and this time we were told that the technical memorandum would be distributed to the board. I've subsequently sent an email back to Sam Adams, and I believe I CC'd Director Duncan asking that the technical memorandum be included in the packet as public comment for the next meeting of the Watermaster. So that's where we are with the this first deliverable.
Thank you, David.
Thanks,
Does
David.
anyone have any questions of this report for David? I was at the presentation and I thought it was very well done and very well received, and they had, in addition to the talk, they had a poster session. So you could actually go to each of these issues that they were dealing with and look at the posters and talk to the postdocs that were working on them. So it was really well done, well received, and we appreciate this information, Mr. Garman. So does anybody have any comments or questions? Kevin?
David, in the water master meeting, maybe you caught this, I didn't. Mark Jorgensen requested to the board that the water master board ask, or I guess tell, the environmental working group to review this document. And I believe that the water master board did not do that. Am I correct? Did you
Yes.
catch that?
Yes, that is my understanding, that in fact, a motion was never made. I think that it stopped sort of a step short before somebody made a motion to refer the technical report to the environmental working group or to the TAC. I personally think it would be important for the TAC to evaluate this.
Also.
Yes.
Oh, right. Seems like a UWG topic too. Right?
Well, for
It's in the
sure.
name, right?
So, yeah, at the water master meeting, there was some pushback on whether, on the science, as whether it's not best available science, it's science provided by it's program or okayed by the water master. So that's something that needs to be addressed still.
Madam Director, I was having a hard time hearing, but I think you said that the water master only wishes to acknowledge science that has been commissioned by the water master. Did I hear that correctly?
There was an assertion to that effect, and there was no discussion beyond that. So that's where things left off. So there was no further motion, like you said, about referring this study to anybody else.
So if DWD wanted to push it along, we could formally request that it become an agenda item? Is that right, Dave and Steve, I guess?
But it sounds like David might be in that part of the process right now. He's waiting for determination on whether it will be included in a future board packet or not.
But that's not the same as.
No, I agree. So we might have to kind of wait for that answer, and then if the answer is kind of what we expect based on previous statements, that, yep, no, regardless of who did it, if it's not a water master study, we can't look at it. If we get, and I think that answer is expected.
One thing that was missing, one person that was missing at the water master meeting was the attorney, Mr. Markman. So our attorney did speak up to the assertion that was made about not accepting science that was outside of the water master. And he was, the response to that was that's Mr. Anderson's interpretation. And so clearly we need to have a further discussion about all of that. And Mr. Markman, you know, his opinion is going to really matter. He needs to speak to the subject as well. So, Diane.
I'm sorry, I was forgetting my manners. But as far as timing goes, if we wait, if David gets it into the next package and it just sort of dies at birth, then we've lost another month. So I'm wondering if we do want to try to actually get it on the agenda.
Well,
May I say something? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Director Johnson on this. My attempt to have this included as part of the public comment was just to make sure that the document sees the light of day. But there would be no actionable consequence of that. Whereas BWD asking for this item to be agendized and considered by the water master for referral to the TAC. That's something that will need to happen one way or the other, regardless of whether or not the technical memorandum is included in the packet for public comment.
I see what he's saying. So he was just asking it to get
He was
included in
asking-
the public comment
He was
section.
asking for it to be, for it. So basically, that's different from putting it on the agenda.
I think Mr. Anderson has a comment.
Oh, yes, Steve. We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
We can see you, but we can't hear you, Mr. Anderson.
Oh, I guess not. He unmuted and, never mind.
Nothing happened. Okay. Maybe he's refuting what I said. Anyway,
Just to cut off. No
yeah. Well, you know, attorneys always have kind of the last word, right?
So,
Gina.
so is our next step to try to get this on the next water master agenda? I mean, it seems to me this kind of pushes the question eventually of what science do they accept? You know?
I think that is the fundamental question.
That is,
That
By putting this-
question needs to be answered.
by putting this.
Perhaps
on-
by putting this on the agenda, Chairman, that would open the discussion about what kind of science
Right,
can or needs to be accepted by the water master.
right, because this is a pretty, you know,
That's
it's
important. I mean,
a
anything-
well-respected, well-done
Yes.
document by
But not only
credible
that, but it,
scientists.
you know, it opens the
You know.
door, we need to make sure that any future studies
Right,
that might be done will also be accepted, you know, as part of the studies for the water master. So,
this is a good, to me, test balloon.
so,
At a time where it's not, it's just information for us, but it's not critical where we need an action or.
they don't have, this is the preliminary research that has been done. There are no conclusions drawn except to say we need to look at this
Right.
further. So this is a good time to bring this up and talk about it.
And I suggested.
Madam Chair, can you hear me
Like
now?
to cover-
Oh, there he is.
We hear you.
Sorry. Thank you.
Oh.
Is it okay if I say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, we've been waiting.
Oh, thank you. I just want to make sure that, because I heard something slightly different on the Water Master meeting. I made a comment about, you know, the sigma requirement and the judgment requirement that best available science be used. But the response from one of the Water Master board members was not, we're only going to trust science that's produced by the Water Master. What I heard was that information brought before the water master could be brought before the water master from third parties, but that there would be a rigorous vetting process of that third party information, presumably by the experts, which is the TAC and to some extent the environmental working group. So maybe I misheard, but that's what I think I heard. I didn't hear, oh no, we're not going to consider anything that's not produced by the water master. But I know others were on the phone too, but I are on the meeting too, but that's what I thought I heard.
Luckily, there's a recording.
I heard that too. I heard the same thing, Steve. I heard the same thing from this particular director.
But that vetting process is exactly why you would forward this to the EWG and the TAC.
Right.
So we need to make sure that that happens. So by putting it on the agenda,
Yeah.
we can request that these studies get forwarded to the two committees that work with the water master. And those are where the recommendations will come from. But I also feel very strongly that we need to make sure that the water master understands the science, the best science is what should be, what needs to be used at all times, not, and yeah, rigorously vetted, I think that's fine, but as long as it gets to review by the water master committees.
That's all we're asking.
So are we in agreement that we will ask the chair of the water master to put that on our agenda?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you. We're good. Thank you, Mr. Garmin.
Thanks, David.
We will see what happens next.
All righty. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about the work that these wonderful UCI scientists are doing on our behalf.
Yeah, they seem to be extremely bright and well versed in what they're doing. So,
Can-
thank you, Diane.
Could I also just point out that this is being paid for, this work, by the Department of Water Resources? And I don't think they would like it very much to be told, no, your research doesn't count, so.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks,
again.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Garmin.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but could we make sure we get public comment on this one?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Let's have a moment of public comment for anybody who would like to speak to this item on the agenda. Like a moment of silence. Hearing nobody speaking up or trying to unmute, I will say that we will go forward to item 2B, the calculation of BWD wastewater dwelling unit and equivalent dwelling units.
Some fun topic, huh?
Oh,
Okay, so in the wastewater world, let's see. We're at a very interesting point in the evolution of our system. As we all know, the district inherited different areas and have incorporated, but town center sewer, BSR Club Circle, and Rams Hill, and ultimately have provided sewer service to all of those developments. Each area has its own unique legal requirements associated with it, and primarily the flow per equivalent dwelling unit varies dramatically between the various areas. Town center sewer is contractually obligated to provide 250 gallons per EBU, and the typical flows per EBU is significantly less than that, less than 100 gallons per day. So now that we're at this, on the precipice of potential future significant development with Rams Hill's plans for expansion out there, we just need to make sure that as we calculate the existing capacity of the wastewater treatment plant, as well as we plan for the future, in terms of, gee, how much water and how much sewer our future homes can use out here. And then kind of taking it one step further, theoretically, if a commercial development were to happen, you need what's called an equivalent dwelling unit, and that is the conversion between the standard dwelling unit, the typical residence, to everything else. How do you compare a restaurant to a house? Well, there's a table for that, and the county has a standard table that unfortunately doesn't apply well in Borrego, just because of our kind of sporadic occupancy out here. We just don't, Borrego typically doesn't produce the sewer flows that other areas do with more consistent usage. So if we use the standard equivalent dwelling unit chart conversions, like what the county has, we end up, once again, kind of overestimating demands, which probably comparing overestimating demands to underestimating demands, I'd rather have excess capacity than no capacity. So I'd rather be in the position we're in, but what ends up happening is if you operate with dramatically lower flows than what you expect, you have kind of sewage quality issues, right, with the aerobic conditions being developed. And then if you take those numbers and start using those into the future, like if we just continue to plan that every equivalent dwelling unit in town center sewer is going to use 250 gallons, and maybe apply that to other areas within our service area, like especially Rams Hill, you end up overestimating demands, which, once again, we kind of don't want to do that. I feel much more comfortable if we have equivalent dwelling unit factors and gallon per day per sewage dwelling unit per the average house numbers that were really accurate for Borrego. And this might sound familiar because we just recently did a wastewater treatment plant study to look at how much existing capacity we have in the plant, and dwelling unit and equivalent dwelling units in terms of gallons per day per EDU were identified. Now, unfortunately, those numbers were created based on total flows into the plant minus, we have two ways to measure the three legs of the flow that come into the system. Okay, and the two ways we can measure it is we know how much water the lift station is taken out, which would be the combined town center and Borrego Springs Resort Club Circle flows, right? And then we now know, based on, we have a meter that measures the BSR Club Circle flow. So we can take the total pumping, subtract what comes in from BSR Club Circle, and then know how much town center is using, right? A minus B equals C, or whatever that is. Then we can take that information and compare that to the total plant inflow. And then if we take out the town center, sewer, Borrego Springs lift station numbers, then we can calculate how much Rams Hill is providing, and the ones in between, Costa, American Legion, but primarily Rams Hill. So we use that system to develop I think we calculated it was around 78 gallons per day per EDU. And then kind of for planning purposes, our engineers estimated that we had one standard deviation, that mathematical number, to our average flow. That ended up with like 98 gallons per day. And then I think we were all a little surprised when Roy came in for about 2 months straight, saying, gee, our flows are a lot higher than they normally were. And they actually doubled that one weekend, maybe it was back in December. And that got me thinking, well, gee, we talked about it, gee, for flows to double just for the restaurants being busy, that just seems like a lot of flow. So we kind of started digging in deeper to where that flow is coming from, and the meter reads kind of don't make sense. You take A minus B and subtract C and then do this mathematical gymnastics. It's like Rams Hill had a relatively big spike in flows. And then we started kind of backtracking, and then we started figuring out that, and Roy reminded us that some of our meters have not been calibrated recently. So we have, and actually no, Greg started it by saying, hey Jeff, just remember that the numbers we used were based on meter flow minus other variables and not more precise metering of each independent leg as it comes into the plant. So Greg admitted that we're doing this mathematical gymnastics to kind of extrapolate numbers, and that's, you can have problems that way. And then we dig a little bit deeper, and I forget which one of the meters hasn't been calibrated in quite a while. I think it might have been the lift station one. So Royce contacted our calibration expert, and I saw an email yesterday that they all have the spare parts needed to get it working more accurately. So the numbers that we put together as part of that DUDEC wastewater treatment plant study that we completed a couple months ago, which we were kind of hanging our hat on, are flawed, just because of this metering issue. And we kind of need to be precise because we want to kind of fix problems from the past and then make sure that what we're doing in the future makes sense for reality. And to kind of exacerbate the problems as we started digging a little bit deeper in terms of which commercial developments pay what, that EDU conversion factor becomes an issue. Because we start comparing what we thought was our average residential flow to these commercial developments, and those don't make sense. There's one condominium project,
Santa Fe Palms.
Yeah, Santa Fe Palms that's paying 3 sewer EDUs for 12 units, and that's probably low. So we also need to go through and kind of inventory all of our existing customers to make sure they're paying the correct EDUs. But then that gets back to that we need to know what is an EDU here for Borrego, because what's important is each dwelling unit's different, and the starting point's different for each area. So it's kind of important for us to determine what does really that typical residential development produce here on the sewer side. And once we have that number, then we can start looking at what are the appropriate conversions to tie into what a typical restaurant here in Borrego uses. And now that's where it starts to get tricky, because it's very difficult to measure sewer flow. It's really on an individual customer basis. We have these collective meters we can monitor and calculate, but that's not. So how do you really try to, and this is still an estimate what sewer flows are, and one way is water consumption. And hopefully you try to find customers that have limited outside water use. I'm thinking like Carly's is probably a really good example, right? And Carmelita's, yeah, the restaurants we have here, well, Carmelita's is by far the best.
Oh,
They might even have an individual private meter there, but I think Carly's is perfect. They're a customer. Very none to little outside irrigation. I haven't really hung out on the side there where the tables are, but I don't see lots of irrigation. So, yeah, so the good news is 100% inside use. Every drop of water that goes into Carly's comes out of the sewer. So that's kind of a good, man, if we had 5 or 10 of those, that would be awesome. It gets more complicated when you have like the condo project that has, unfortunately, 2 swimming pools and irrigation. And then, so to try to calculate how much of that water is being used inside versus irrigation, that becomes complicated. You can look at like seasonal variations and try to estimate, well, gee, in that month, about that much of water is used outside, because when it's cool, the demands go down. So you can try to, like, once you kind of extrapolate and estimate that certain times increases are due to outside irrigation. So you can kind of start to estimate how much outside irrigation is happening. So a lot of moving parts, but it all comes back to what is that first number of how much sewage does the typical residents here in Borrego Springs produce, and getting that number to be accurate, and then B, coming up with the appropriate EDU conversions. So we can take that dwelling unit number and turn into EDUs for laundromats, restaurants, car washes, I kind of forget what's on the typical list, but your typical commercial establishments in other areas. So a lot of important impacts on kind of making sure we understand what we have now. Thank you very much, Jessica, for digging deeper, and thank you for asking very basic but kind of questions. I mean, they're really simple. Like, how many customers do we have? And thank God Dave asked 4 times, because we finally went from 800 to 300. You know, yeah, it's making a difference. So unfortunately, it's the Russian doll thing. You pop one open and there's another doll inside. I think we're done with the new issues. I think we know what they are now. So it's really down to this dwelling unit and then the conversion to equivalent dwelling unit analysis that needs to happen. So Greg from DUDEC put together a proposal, actually an abbreviated scope of work right there. It's in the work packet. I do believe Greg is on the board here today. I might have done your presentation for you, buddy. Sorry about that. But Greg is here, I do believe, to answer any questions anyone might have on this dwelling unit, equivalent dwelling unit issue for wastewater. Greg, are you there? Did I miss anything? Anything you would like to add, sir?
No, that was
Excellent. I heard it go.
I think he said.
So this is what, $28,000?
26,950.
Super important, and I think this is a BWD expense because we're still kind of trying to figure out what we're doing, making sure that our method of calculating dwelling units, equivalent dwelling units, this obviously ties into our rates and charges going forward. So kind of knowing this information to me is real critical for even our next Prop 218 process. So.
Where in the budget does that fit, Jessica?
It would, this would fall under engineering on the wastewater side. We are.
So this is probably a 1-month project. Greg started a week or 2 ago based on my verbal okay. So please approve this project so we can do.
Or Gina?
I move that we approve this.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Abby?
I can add that the ad hoc thoroughly approves this extra, or this new work. Great.
Any other discussion?
Just to point out that a lot of these questions came up in our discussions about how to deal with T2 and Ramsdale's expansion. But most of these issues are really beyond Ramsdale. I mean, there are just a lot of just basic questions that need to be answered for the entire system, you know, and it's not specific to Ramsdale. So this expense really, in all fairness, isn't something that we can push up off on the T2. It impacts us district-wide, not just Ramsey.
I agree that it seems to be, I mean, it seems very important that we know what the actual use is.
And all this will be used in the Ramsey planning process, all of this information and data. And what's a dwelling unit, what's an
So
equivalent
what-
dwelling unit,
yeah.
so we're all speaking the same language. And hopefully reality matches our plan.
So it will work across the board, is what I'm saying. Is there any comment from the public?
Kathy, I have a comment.
Okay, Diane, go ahead.
I wonder if it would be worth Dudek, I guess, looking at other wastewater systems like over in Arizona or up in the Coachella Valley and getting an idea of what kind of EDUs wastewater EDUs have used.
It's beautiful. Greg's got experience all around the state, big districts, little districts, one just like ours that has a 250,000 gallon per day treatment plant with a 64,000 gallon per day package plant next to it. He represents big agencies, so he's got a lot of experience in this area. So we've kind of talked about it, but I just don't want to take the County of San Diego standard template for EDUs because, like I said, it overestimates our demand. So a lot of this falls back in our lap because if we just use the standard engineering numbers that are used elsewhere, we're going to end up kind of in this, potentially end up in the same problem where it just, what happens elsewhere, it's just different here, just because it's
Maybe that's
5 months of a ghost town, you know, like maybe like no other place is. You know, so.
Maybe that's what's happened with the plant that we've got, why it was so overbuilt 25 years ago,
40 years ago.
Yeah.
40 years ago.
Yeah, the founding fathers of Town Center, yeah. I think they were motivated because septic tanks were failing and without some method of collecting sewage, and getting it somewhere else, yeah, the downtown's done. So they got a necessity. And they did a lot of work, the locals did. Built the infrastructure and dedicated it to the district. The district added sewage collection and treatment to its latent powers with LAFCO.
Do any of the, and I guess maybe you guys will look into this, to say like T2, they know what they're pumping out of that one well that is just for irrigation. Do we have any other information from others that kind of isolate irrigation from regular drinking water?
Indoor versus outdoor, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, each area is a little different.
Right.
I think, you know, other than Ramshill, maybe Deanta, the residential customers kind of in between those two ends of the spectrum probably have a much higher percentage, proportionate share of inside versus outside compared to the others, but it's going to be literally looking at an individual meter by meter analysis. I haven't quite figured out, Greg and I are talking about the best way to do that. I wish there were a lot more Carlys out there, and I think the good news is there are on the residential side. But then again, we also want to know what residential sewage flows are like in Ramshill. So we're going to have to do some form of total water minus an estimate for irrigation. Once again, that's more us giving data to Greg as opposed to him figuring it out as he needs that.
Any other discussion? Questions? Yeah.
Jeff, would you be able to reach out to Jim Warmers to get private meter water data for Pablitos and Carmelitas and some other places that are clearly established?
Yeah, we were talking about Carmelitas is a good one. That's a private meter that Warmers has, but yeah, we would have access to that.
So
Pretty much everything.
Mr. Warmers would be willing to share the private meter data with us?
He has shared private meter data with me, like on the laundromat. So, as we're calculating what appropriate fees were to convert tons from the sheriff's station to a laundromat. Kind of the classic example of dramatic changes, water and sewer use, right? Yeah.
I think it's
Bread and water.
it would benefit him, I think.
I think we should make that request, I guess. So my
Yeah,
point
for
is
sure.
that
Yeah, that's all part of that's all part of that.
And the only other thing to tag on to Diane, your comment, Greg, and the Zadok stuff, that's where we heard this. Greg said that each water district is unique. So a Borrego EDU is different than a Coachella Valley EDU. So that's the purpose of the study, is to really discover Borrego.
And in a perfect world, we would be close to the county standard. If we were in Ramona or Oceanside, that county standard is probably not that far off. But here it's just dramatically different. It's the 4 months of nothing. That would just mess with it.
Well, even beyond the 4 months of nothing, it's just the size of the homes. I mean, you can't compare us to Rancho Santa Fe, where the average home is probably greater than 3,000 square feet, where here in Borrego, the average home is probably less than 2. So, I mean, they're kind of apples and oranges.
That's why I use Ramona and Oceanside. But yeah, every place is different.
It's just different, yeah.
That would be.
Cool.
Anyone else? Any other comments, questions?
Thank you very much.
I'm going to call for the question. All in favor of approving this? I did. All in favor of approving the DUDEX study on EUs, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carried unanimously.
Get it done.
Get it done. So the next item is related. Item 2C is wastewater treatment plant nitrogen control study.
This kind of sounds like a topic we discussed before, which we have, but there's kind of a new twist. Maybe a little bit of good news in this agenda. Oh, a lot of good news in this agenda, I think, potentially. Okay, so as we all know, the BWD receives a discharge permit to operate its wastewater treatment plant. Those discharge permits are good for 10 years, and our last discharge permit was issued in 2017. As part of that, they required new monitoring wells around our percolation ponds, and then a nitrogen control study and a TDS, total dissolved solids control study. Okay, and basically the water board was very nice, and they didn't say, oh, you must do this, you must meet this standard, you must get down to X ppm of this and that. In terms of nitrogen, they said, you tell us what you can do, you come up with a plan, you'll submit it to us, and we'll tell you whether that's good or not. So they were very nice. Basically, they said, what can you do? How would you do it? You put that into a plan, submit it to us, and then very likely that requirement would pop up in our next discharge permit, or maybe sooner, but no, probably not. We're almost there already. So the district has been obligated to do a nitrogen and TDS study since 2017, but that's all pending completion of the monitoring wells. The state wanted us to get those done first, which construction will be underway soon. So in the back of my mind, I know we had to do a nitrogen study. Nitrogen came up, as part of the wastewater treatment plant analysis that we conducted. You did an excellent job at looking at each individual component of the wastewater treatment plant. Right? Awesome work. And discovered that the nitrogen removal system, which technically isn't part of our discharge permit, but we need to comply with, we need to make sure we're not discharging excess levels of nitrogen. So we knew we needed to do this study, and DUDEC concluded that that's really critical, and that we have 108 EDUs remaining before the nitrogen load capacity was met at our wastewater treatment. So we have what we call the significant bottleneck, right? Mm-hmm. And there were two components, an oxidation ditch and the nitrogen removal, TKN removal system. They totaled, in the last DUDEC study, $1.2 million. Those were the infamous alternatives 0 and 1 in the study. Now, that's all required by, just the study of it's required by the regional board. But then as the finance committee, or maybe it was the new development committee, agreement committee, actually. But as we were looking at these issues, funding the one, and it actually, it came up in the budget committee. That's right. Coming up with the cash flow needed to fund the bottleneck, is a $1.2 million hit, potentially to BWD cash reserves, which, mathematically we have it, but with our planned water supply acquisitions and paying 20% potentially of the ISA, the pipeline project money that we received, our cash flows are going in the wrong direction. They will recover, the future is bright. We're just on very good projects spending a lot of money right now on BPA acquisition, like I said, these other projects. So a $1.2 million hit to cash flows interesting. And then we were starting to talk amongst the committee about, gee, do we raise rates to cover this, which kind of gets us into the next Prop 218, and then who should pay for it? Should it be everybody? And so those philosophical discussions were underway. And me and it doesn't hurt to ask mantra, I thought, okay, let me just talk to my friends at the state and see if we can get a grant to fix the bottleneck at the wastewater treatment plant. Okay, so we have really great grants folks, Joseph Keelaton at Water Boards, and he's actually the same guy that's doing the tank grant for us, so they did a little restructuring, and so now the grant people work on both wastewater and water projects together. We have the same guy that's doing the work for us. He worked with us on Roy's renovation of the wastewater treatment plant. He's been here. I've been talking to him once a month for 7 years, so we're really good buddies. So I said, hey, Joseph, do you have any potential grant funding for this? And I sent them Greg for PVEC study and said, hey, we're looking at alternative zero and one. How about a grant for that? Would this qualify? I said, hey, this is really important because A, it's technically not required because the state doesn't like to fund projects typically that are already required unless it's really bad. Some sort of failure. And so, and then there's potential big impacts to water quality, right? Because if we discharge water into our perk ponds that have excessive nitrogen in it, then we have the potential impacts to groundwater quality, of which we will now be able to monitor more closely with the new monitoring wells around the basin. So I really pushed hard on it's not required and it has impacts to groundwater quality. And after a couple weeks, Joseph had a couple questions for me, and he wanted to make sure that the other alternatives 2, 3, 4, 5, I think there were 5 total that had different, significant treatment plant capacity expansions, another 250, another 250, reclamation, and the numbers got real big. Joseph just wanted to make sure that those improvements weren't part of what we're talking about. That's definitely not. That's why I asked you to look at alternative 0 and 1. We're just talking about the bottleneck and not the improvements needed to serve new development. He said, Jeff, yeah, I talked to my folks, and that seems to be grant eligible. So he asked me, Jeff, would you like to do a planning grant or a construction grant? And the two are what it sounds like. Now, you can apply for a planning grant, and there's the planning process that takes a year. Then after you get through the planning process, then you go for the construction grant. I would like to strike when the iron's hot and skip the planning grant and go straight to the construction grant. So I called Greg with the good news. I think I should share it with you. I got the good news last week, so I called Greg immediately saying, hey, Greg, basically, can we skip the planning grant? How can we skip the planning grant? And was the information that you put together as part of your recent study considered planning? He said, well, Jeff, not really. However, the district's required to do this nitrogen control study, and the type of work that would be needed to be completed as part of the nitrogen control study is really about how would you control it? Like taking our best guess. No, yeah. I mean that with all due respect, our best guess of what it would cost as part of alternative 0 and 1 of the study. We take it to the next level. Greg might even look at maybe a different technology or something, and really do the planning process as part of this study that we have to do. So what I would like to do is go full steam ahead on this study, the nitrogen control study, and then be totally prepared. And the deal with these grant applications, out of the entire grant package, it's probably 70-30. 30% of the information is related to the project, 70% is related to the environmental, the agency, it's all non-technical stuff. So I'd like to parallel track. Greg will continue on the technical piece, the planning component as part of this nitrogen control study that we're supposed to do anyway. Then I'll continue with the grant development stuff, all the forms and just blah, 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 that's required. And so let's say in July, when the grant office opens again, because they close in April to close their books out, and then they open again next fiscal year. So I'll be ready in July, maybe have the board ready to approve packages in July that then could be submitted when the office opens back up in August. So we would be kind of the first in line for next year with the planning document done, our construction application package ready to go. And so we skip the planning grant. Now, why I think it's important is, what it was, 25 and 75, right? With the nitrogen was 25, right? Out of the 75 total?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in theory, we could apply for a $25,000, maybe say we do a little bit more intensive planning. So say we would apply for a $40,000 planning and waste a whole year. Not waste, but obviously be delayed a whole year before starting into construction. A lot can happen between now and then. This, oh, no problem, Jeff, go ahead and apply. That qualifies. That attitude might not be here a year from now, so I'd like to just, like I said, be first in line next year, construction application ready to go. Greg, complete the planning document, and then just proceed with the construction grant and try to really get it done. Go through the process next year, so before they close the grant office next April to have had our package totally reviewed, vetted, changed if needed, and be approved by this time next year or sooner, before they close their office for the end of next fiscal year. So, and then.
So you're proposing spending 75,000?
Yeah.
And Jessica, where does that come from?
This would also be under engineering
Good there.
on the wastewater side. I guess it depends on how much would be done this fiscal year, but they do have ample room in the sewer operating budget if we have to pull from there.
Okay, so ultimately the goal would be then the state would fund this very important improvement. We don't have to take it out of our cash reserves and then pay ourselves back over a long period because we have to raise rates. If we don't get grant money, the only other funding source would be to raise rates as part of the next Prop 218. We would probably need to do the work for the next Prop 218, maybe not, 2 years from now. Obviously, if we get a grant, we would do the work immediately. Let's say start it a year-ish, a year and a half from now. That would be the plan. So then we can, on our cash flow, not have to come up with $1.2 million in the near future for that.
Question.
Yes.
What's the split on the grant? 80-20 or is it 100%?
Let me just one second. This would be wastewater. We got 100% grant on our wastewater treatment plant renovation. It's the same grant application process. It's the same grant program, I guess is the right term. So I would expect 100% funding.
They'll pay it from us. 100%. Okay.
That would be fine.
That's kind of the SDAX. There's a lot of waiving of the match with the SDAX. And that's another, I think I have it on my staff report. A different grant.
It would seem to me that the board needs to give staff direction to do this.
I agree.
Yep, cool.
So board, what say
Yes,
you? Is that a motion?
yes, I'll move.
You'll move to approve the expenditure of $75,000 for a nitrogen study,
Yes.
nitrogen control study. Do I have a second for that?
Yes.
Seconded by Director Duncan. Is there any further discussion or questions?
Yes, I would like to amend the motion to include moving ahead to enter into the grant process as well.
Thank you. Absolutely. Do you find that amendment acceptable? Yes, Diane accepts that amendment to include entering into the grant process.
Yeah, we'll handle that so far in-house. I'm not asking for any help for the grant application.
Excellent. Okay. Any other comments or questions from the directors? Any questions or comments from the public? All right, then, I'm going to call for the question to approve the expenditure of $75,000 for the nitrogen control study and enter into the grant process for the construction of that program. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Go forward, Mr. Cole.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Greg, wherever you are.
Good
Thank
job.
you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't need that.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, item 2E is the update on the California Drought Executive Order. This looks like a subject for Mr. Anderson.
I think you missed B.
Oh, I did? Proposition 68 procurement procedures and environmental review analysis.
Yes. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay.
On the topic of Prop 68, This is a $6.1 million basin-wide grant that includes a series of projects. Well, we talked about the GDE project earlier. Now, if you recall, BWD has a very important role in this process as the contracting agency. So although we're ultimately responsible, we have passed through all those technical responsibilities to each of the sub-grantees. But once again, BWD is ultimately responsible, so we have various responsibilities that come with that. So what I'd like to chat about today would be 3 different actions. The first revolves around procurement procedures. Now, the way the state has handled this issue is very hands-off, to say the least, right, Jessica? They don't want to hear anything. They don't want to answer any question about, can we do this, can we do that with purchasing related issues. They said each individual agency needs to follow its own purchasing policy. Now, I think embedded into that, DWR assumes that each agency's purchasing policy is legally compliant and, is okay. So I see why they're taking that position, because I think if they got involved in refereeing and reviewing each purchase and each policy, or maybe they did that before, right? And they tried to get involved and it was a nightmare. So now in these grants, they say, oh, you are on your own, it's up to you. You just need to comply with your own policies. And obviously, BWD has its own purchasing policy that talks about different contractual arrangements and how those services are procured. Examples being what professional services, which are consultants, the type of work that David Garman was talking about. Well, we got public works, which is when you're actually doing something, right? Well abandonment project like the Water Master has, or a new monitoring well like the Water Master has, would be examples of public works projects. And so there are rules about how that money can be spent that are in our purchasing policy that I identified there in the packet. And I think the last one that would apply here would be equipment, materials, and something else. Kind of the paper clips and not that small, but important materials and equipment, and there are different rules for that. So whether it's consultants, construction, or stuff that you're buying, you must comply with our rules. Okay. And so typically on professional services, the state likes to see public agencies formally formally solicit services and select. Now, professional services those agreements we aren't required to accept the low bidder. It's not a public works project, so there's some latitude there. But we're supposed to follow a formal solicitation process. Now, there are some caveats that if there are extenuating circumstances where that formal solicitation is not possible, such as insufficient time to complete the process, then we can waive our purchasing procedures and proceed using what's called a sole source agreement. Okay. Now, in terms of sole sourcing professional services agreement, almost every project on the list, maybe with the exception of our AMI, which we're gonna receive solicitations for that, and then we bid our monitoring well project, right? We actually bid it, so we really jumped through all the hoops. Pretty much all the other projects have all or a big component would be professional services, and each project is evolved over years, some of them. So there are kind of experts that just make the most sense to use going forward. But we heard during the Water Master Prop 68 process that UC was I think they even used the only organization that could support them on their farmland fallowing project, I believe that was, right? The fallowing restoration. So that's the classic example of when you don't have time and the experts are here, I'm totally comfortable in waiving our requirements and allowing sole source professional services agreements on both, in essence, our sub-grantees projects. Now, once again, why are we making this determination when it's their projects? Well, it's because we're the contracting agency, and it's almost out of an abundance of caution, I guess. There's even kind of an audit trail perspective to this, that when we're not following our own purchasing procedures, Neil, Jessica's friends at our auditing firm want to see why. Why didn't you? And so Once again, this is a grant. We want to be, not that we're never squeaky clean, but, make sure we jump through all the hoops that we don't want to do. Oh, you did that, you didn't waive your purchasing policy. Yeah, we don't want to get caught in a little technicality 3 years, no, not 3 years, a year from now that then somehow make a significant or any of the possible costs non-reimbursable going forward. So we're being kind of super cautious. So I did list kind of on a project by project basis, which project, oh, that's right, you haven't seen the package. So Jessica, just scroll down. So within the package, so there, for example, on each project, project 1, I talk about the procurement method. And so we did the project development work, partially in-house. Actually, I was a lot of the David Dale stuff, and then we used a little bit of DUDEC to help with the design. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm backwards. AMI is first. I'm sorry. So we are in the process right now of developing the proposal. So that's being done in-house. Thank you very much, Tammy, Jessica, and company. And then, so that is totally compliant with our policy. And then, as part of the vendor selection, we're planning on going through a formal solicitation process. Once again, totally compliant with BWB's policies. Okay. And then, this kind of the second issue I'd like to talk about would be the CEQA requirements. Each project is required to follow the CEQA rules, whether they're a public agency or not. So in the case of virtually all the projects, maybe with the exception of the Water Masters monitoring well and their well abandonment, actually the Water Master is hiring a consultant, a CEQA consultant, to help them determine the appropriate environmental documents. But for really everyone else, a notice of exemption. It might even be true for the Water Master projects. I think we would be comfortable filing a notice of exemption on a monitoring well. We did that at the wastewater treatment plant. So the Water Master staff would like to hire its own consultant and talk to its own consultant about what that individual thinks would be the appropriate environmental review for their public works projects. Once again, we're okay with notice of exemption, but the Water Master just wanted to ask their own consultants and do it themselves. But in the case of every other project, it's typically a study, a lot of paper pushing, no CEQA review on that. And so for our automated meter reading proposal on project, we're totally compliant on the procurement side. Then on the CEQA, we're actually, we attached in this packet the notice of exemption for the automated meter reading. It's not just a study, automated meter reading. Sure, there's a lot of electronics involved, but we're still digging in meter boxes, digging out meter boxes. There is a kind of a public works component to that, so it's important that we perform the appropriate environmental review. So that's why in this packet, you will see a notice of exemption for the AMI. It's one of the attachments. I'd like to get the board to approve that before we're done here today. So in terms of our project, the AMI, we're cool. Everything's compliant. And once you all approve the notice of exemption, check, 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 check. Project 2, the monitoring well. We sole sourced the design, bidding, and professional services agreement with DUDEC just because of their experience, and we had very little time. And in many ways, we kind of started this prior to the Prop 68. We're going to do it anyway. We're proposing a sole source contract there, and then we will go. Actually, we did a formal bidding process under Project 2A2. We did complete the formal bidding process, so everything is compliant there. But once again, we would like your recognition at the end that both BWD and others will be following a sole source procedure on professional services, including the design work on our monitoring well. In terms of CEQA for our monitoring well, that was approved 3 or 4 months ago, the notice of exemption, so that document, you don't need to approve it again. That was done. That was done a long time ago because that project has a little bit longer life to it. We've actually, like I said, already designed it, bid it, bids have been opened, and the construction will start within the next couple of weeks. Okay. Project, thank you, Jessica. Project number 3, the Water Masters biologically restored lands project. They would like to, in essence, hire consultants to help them complete that study. That being the UC and Land IQ. Thank you very much. So they're going to hire a couple of consultants to help with that. So that would be another sole source professional services agreement. That once again, I would like the board to recognize that due to the lack of time, that is now deemed to be compliant with this process. We'll take that will come at the end. Virtually everyone has the same issue. In terms of the environmental review for the Water Master's biologically restored lands, as I just mentioned, they are hiring a CEQA consultant, and I think, right, Jessica, talking to the person like this week to get what they think would be the appropriate environmental review for their project, which that's fine. That's their prerogative. It's their project. Okay, so for the GMP update, got a little combination here. We have both the professional services agreement under project 4A1. Have the same deal. We don't have a lot of time, so the Water Master would like to use the sole source professional services agreement concept. And then there will be public works components of their project, the well abandonment and the monitoring well construction. And so they would be required to receive formal quotations for that following prevailing wage requirements. So that project will be compliant because they fully intend to ultimately bid those services. And then on the CEQA side, they're also contacting their CEQA expert to give them advice on the best CEQA documentation for that project. Next, school. I was going to say that's just like all the others, but they actually have another unique component, that being materials. We do a little demonstration garden. We're actually going to buy some stuff. So they have a combination of both a professional services agreement for the teachers and the instructors, and then they do have a gentleman who's going to help build the demonstration, the physical equipment and demonstration garden stuff that's needed for the school project. So they will also use professional services agreement sole source, and then they will also buy some materials, and they would need to do the informal price quotations, at least get some. You don't have to do bid documents, but at least have some quotes, 3 quotes at least in materials that they're buying. So that will all be compliant. Once again, once the board concurs that sole source PSAs are okay. Civic well.
Who's doing their CEQA on the school project?
Mark gave me one already. Yes, Mark gave me one.
It says not.
Oh, because I didn't think it was, but then I'm sorry, but yes, they did complete it. Thank you for that. Next, civic well. That's a combination of professional services agreement and then a notice of exemption that Steve helped put together. We offered our support on that. These are, as you can see in the attachments, really simple one-page documents for notice of exemption. And then, last but not least, the GDE, which would be the same thing, sole source professional services agreement with notice of exemption. So that's it. That's where we are. So
does BWD have to approve their expenditures before to make sure that they're going to be reimbursable, or how?
Technically, no.
So you're basically saying this is how it works, and please do it this way.
Yep. It's up to each individual sub-grantee to make sure that their expenses are eligible based on everything that they submitted.
So you're basically asking them to follow our purchasing procedures. Okay.
If something is out of balance, so to speak, then we might see it. Probably not, but then if it's really wacky, then the state would say, whoa.
What is this?
Not even close.
Anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
So I'm just, for the sole source, for the professional services agreement, is that it says due to lack of time, it's because we need to meet the timing of Route 68 and
They're getting
it's
getting a late start.
Right.
We're like, what?
Less than 2 years.
And DWR's good with that. Okay.
Once again, actually, we asked them, but they said, it is up to you. They don't want to have any opinion on purchasing with the 10-foot pole. So just to be technically correct, no, DWR did not say it's okay. DWR said follow your own policies. So we are totally dealing with our own policies. Quite a few emails between us, Steve's expert in this area to make sure that we're covering ourselves. So the board making this declaration is what's required to be compliant.
It's based on, these other contractors are concerned that they've lost time in this grant process and that they need to get moving, so I think it's appropriate.
Well, I just want to thank you. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really transparent,
Yeah,
very readable and understandable, and will help us. And it's a good way moving forward with grants. So thank you both for. So,
anyone else have questions or comments, Tammy?
As part of this process, will BWD audit these groups to see that they followed our purchasing process?
Yeah. Audit might be a strong word, but
It sounds to me like you're saying that you're asking them to follow a purchasing process, and if there's any weird thing, you're gonna.
they're legally obligated to do it. You know, those specific requirements were part of the sub-grantee agreement they signed. But once again, like, I don't want to be responsible, so I don't want to give the sub-grantees a false sense of security that, oh, the district's going to spot something if we did something wrong, because I don't want that to be put on us. Oh, the district submitted to the state, so you're responsible for it. So it kind of gets back to we are hands off. These are their projects, but we don't want anybody to fail. We want to help as much as possible. This is being, I won't say overly communicative, but this is just another indication of everybody understands what everybody's doing, but without us being responsible for anything.
So if one of the sub-grantees didn't get 3 quotes for the equipment that they need, they just got one, and that gets discovered, DWR will pass it to us, and we have to go extract money from that sub-grantee because that expense was.
In theory, sure. In the worst case of scenarios, yeah. No. Frequent communications.
Just trying to understand.
No, yeah.
So we choose not to audit. We choose, we're not gonna ask them for the 3 copies of the.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we would do that. Yeah, we'd ask them the 3 quotes. I'm sure the state would probably want it. I just don't know what all the detailed forms entail and what's technically required as part of the attachments, but that type of information would very likely be submitted to the state. So we would see the 3 quotes.
Because that's what would make it reimbursable, so of course that would help.
But thanks for kind of the reminder that, okay, yeah, make sure that it's really the school, so we'll just make sure.
I just think one.
No, but thank you. That was a good one.
Water Master's gonna have stuff too, I mean, there's. Okay, thanks.
Anyone else have questions or comments?
Sorry, one more question. I remember, maybe Steve, you can help me with this memory, that work was, okay, so could be wrong, work was not supposed to start until CEQA was approved. Am I remembering that right? And does this mean that CEQA has not yet been approved because we have not yet voted?
Right. So the way that the grant agreement works is that all draft CEQA documents, not final, draft, need to be approved by DWR. And then once they're approved by DWR, and that just means they bless it, they're not actually stamping it, then it comes back to the BWD board, and then the BWD board has to formally approve that CEQA document, both for your own projects and for these other projects, right? Because I know Gina knows this, but the way CEQA works is CEQA is applicable to public agencies, right? And the way that the grant and DWR look at this is BWD is effectively got its fingerprints on all these projects, even if the projects are, the Water Master project or whatever. For CEQA purposes, the grant money is flowing through our fingers, and so therefore we're the CEQA agency that has to comply. And then in addition to that, if there's any other public agencies involved, like the school district, they also have to approve the CEQA too. So yes, you're right, Tammy. And what we're doing here, as Jeff has so ably described, is that for professional services agreements, your type of water district does not have to bid those, but your procurement policy requires that. And so what we're doing today is we're waiving those requirements. Because the board approved that policy, you can also vote to waive those requirements. That's entirely within your power.
So yeah, the dates on the notice of exemptions are important. So like the UCI dates months ago.
So we haven't approved that yet.
Well, here's the deal. I'll be honest with you. There's new news. I'm not sure that we have to physically approve the notices of exemption. just, I'm in the middle of emails with the state, and Steve doesn't even know this. This was literally Friday as I was putting the packet together. You might have, like, you did see it. In the first version of the packet, we were going to approve all the notices of exemption, and then via emails I had with Chris at the state, he said, no, they can receive them directly from the subgrantee.
So it's just
I'm
ours.
still, so that's why I put, thank you, that's why I put ours on there, because I know for sure we need to approve ours, but
Yeah,
we might not
looking
need
down
to.
the list and thinking, oh.
His first answer was, we don't need to, and I just want to make sure. Because he might not remember that there are some non-public agencies in our subgrantee list. He might not remember that. So I just want to make sure.
Any other questions? Gina?
I don't have any other questions. I was ready to go.
Okay. And I just want to ask for public comment first. Actually, you can make a motion. I can ask for public comment. Go ahead.
I move that we make the finding to waive our process for professional service agreements and to approve the notice of exemption.
Thank you, Gina. Do I have a second? Are there any comments from the public on this agenda item?
Yeah, this is Bob Krasowski. I have a question. I'm a bit confused on this UCI project. I'm of the understanding that it's being funded by you folks at the Water District to the tune of $1.3 million. But earlier, Diane said something, if I heard correctly, it's kind of difficult to hear, but I heard her say something about the DWR providing the funds for that project. And then, now your discussion here now, you said some other things. So could Jeff or someone answer, clear up my confusion? Like, is the money $1.3 million? Where is it actually coming from? And yeah, that's it.
So Bob, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so we're talking about a grant from the Department of Water Resources, DWR. It's the whole project as a whole is $6.1 million. And it's comprised of several different projects under that umbrella. And so that we're talking about all the different projects, I don't know how many, seven projects that we're doing under this large grant from the Department of Water Resources, and the one that you're asking about, the UCI grant, is $1.3 million about. And so the Borrego Water District is the administrator for this grant, but the money ultimately is coming from the Department of Water Resources. So it's a reimbursable grant. So we're kind of the middleman. The contractors and these different grant projects will submit their invoices to BWD, and then we turn around and ask the Department of Water Resources, DWR, to reimburse us. So it's kind of like the money is flowing through a couple of different hands, but it's ultimately a DWR grant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so far, one follow-up. Is DWR identified as CEQA, or are the CEQA funds flowing through DWR? What is that?
Yes, there's nothing that funds the CEQA process. CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. It is something that has to be done for any kind of project that's done by a public agency. Anytime you're going to build a shed or dig a ditch or put in, whatever you might want to do, it has to go through this process and be approved usually, for the kinds of things we're doing, it's a notice of exemption, which means that we don't have any issues that would affect environmental quality. Does that make, so it's
Okay.
it's separate from the project itself, but it's a process that needs to be done before you start.
Okay, so I think I understand, and thank you very much. If there's some kink in the process, though, which I doubt is going to happen, but if something were to happen, how would BWD manage a situation where, let's say, the DWR decided you didn't meet the criteria for funding for them to actually fund you? Would the project just stop at that point, or would you lose the money because you'd have to back it up, or something like that? What would happen then?
That probably is the worst case scenario, but I think that Jeff and Jessica being our financial officers, they both are going to be in constant communication with these people that are doing the projects, and they're going to make sure that, one of the jobs that we have as the administrator is to make sure that they're following instructions on how to be reimbursed for their projects. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
If somehow there's a failure, then I think ultimately BWD is out the money.
I think technically BWD's protected itself contractually. So I think the sub-grantees are ultimately on the hook. So because the sub-grantees are providing the cash flow, maybe with the exception of Stewardship Council, but everyone else, the sub-grantees are providing their own cash flow. So if there is a uneligible expense and it's discovered and it's rejected, then ultimately the sub-grantees would not be reimbursed for it. So that would fall on the sub-grantees now.
Very good, thank you.
That's the worst case scenario. We're doing everything we can to avoid that, but we just had to protect ourselves because we can't be on the hook for something the Stewardship Council does, or just pick them, sorry. Any of the sub-grantees were to do it.
Okay, so does that answer your question, Bob?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks, Bob.
Any other questions or comments from the public? Hearing none, I am going to call for the question of approving the process laid out before us and the CEQA notice of exemption for our #1 project, the AMI. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any exemptions? Abstentions. I changed myself, but the motion passes unanimously.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
And now we get down to item 2E, the update on the California Drought Executive Order.
I think that's to Steve. Oh, is that for me? Thank you. So, thank you, board. Good morning. Over the last couple of years, as you've probably all seen in the newspaper and the like, the governor has adopted 4 different emergency proclamations and 3 different executive orders that touch on water issues. And the latest of those was from February of this year, where he modified some of those prior orders. And so because of the existing orders and the modifications that just came about, we decided to put together, and we shared with Jeff, a little memorandum about what's been deleted and what's been required by the state, by the governor at this point in time. And so the highlights of that are listed on your board packet and are on the screen. So I thought I'd go over those as well as a couple of other ones, just so there's no confusion about where we are. So not listed on this, but I wanted to share with you that the governor still, his emergency declaration from a couple of years ago still has, theoretically or on paper, there's still a drought state of emergency in every county in California. So on paper, the governor has not rescinded his order saying that there's a drought emergency still in existence. But what that means is different than it was, say, 6 months ago. So on the screen there, number 2, this board might be aware, and probably is, that you have a water shortage contingency plan, and the governor mandated that level 2 of those water storage or water shortage contingency plans be put into effect. They largely applied to agencies that are a little bit bigger than BWD, but because of you being out in the desert community, I'm pretty sure you adopted this anyway, or something similar. But the governor has confirmed that the emergency regulations related to the stage 2 emergency are going to remain in effect until June 10th of this year. However, the state board clarified in a call last week and at their board meeting that they're actually not going to enforce that on public agencies or on water districts. So on the one hand, the emergency regulations level 2 are still in effect, but if this board or any other board, water board, decides to repeal those, it's okay, because the state water board's not going to make you comply. So that's one thing to think about. Number 2, with respect to watering non-functional turf, so areas that aren't used by the public, I'm sure we had a lot of discussions about these years ago. This is a requirement that is not going really to go away. It's effective until June 10th, but indications from the state, preliminary anyway, are that the ban on watering of non-functional turf is likely to be readopted. So it seems like the state board is can continue to do that. So for all those grassy areas that are sort of in the median or not used by anybody, you're still not allowed to water those. Number 3, there still exists and will continue to exist at least until December this year. They might and probably will be extended, sort of the overarching policies that we've all talked about before, which are you can't, water your lawn such that half the water or any of the water goes onto the sidewalk adjacent. You can't do that. You can't wash your vehicle without a shut-off valve on your hose there, or a what do you call it, like the spray handle that turns on and off. You can't wash down your concrete driveway. You're supposed to sweep that. And if it rains, you're not supposed to water here for 48 to 72 hours. And so those sort of overarching policies remain in effect. And again, they are absolutely the law of the land until December 2023, the end of this year. But it seems like they're going to continue after that as well. The governor also, you all might recall that a couple of years ago, he asked Californians, above and beyond all these requirements, to also voluntarily reduce water use by 15% above and beyond 2020 levels. He has now rescinded that as of last month, so they're no longer good. He continues to have given the state water board a bunch of emergency powers to stop illegal diversions, and those powers given to the state water board continue to exist. And so, hope I didn't confuse anybody, but the governor's orders are a little hard to, you have to kind of put all 5 of them or 7 of them next to each other on the same table and kind of read them together to figure out what he left and what he kept. So happy to answer any questions about that.
Questions?
What are BWD's requirements to enforce the 3 that you mentioned, which included like watering non-functional grass and washing your car? Are we required to enforce those?
Not necessarily, no. On the one hand, it's not an absolute requirement to do that anymore, but I think there's a strong encouragement for local agencies to do that. So if you see it, you shouldn't turn a blind eye to it, but I don't think the state board's going to come after the district if you don't do it. But particularly in the desert area, it's a good idea, as you all, I'm sure, know much better than me, to make sure you're not wasting water, or nobody's wasting water.
Tammy, we have not been able to come up with any non-functional turf, period, in Borrego. Like even the entry to the Anza. On the right, there's almost a football field that's over there. They've got big chess pieces or something periodically. That's even functional. You can walk your dog, people can use it. So it's literally that. And just so you know, like the car washing is important, so we'll just make sure that people are washing their cars. We do stop, but in terms of the non-functional turf. I thought about it. I actually drove around to a few places and took some pictures. And we're not aware of any non-functional turf here. Like literally down the median of the road. Now, there's a lot of caveats there. Even the trees, if the non-functional turf, like in the middle of the road, has trees in it, then you can water it because you got to keep the trees alive. So, yeah.
What about the watering hours? Like, you're supposed to water by 10 a.m.? Is that no longer the case of what hours with which you can irrigate?
Are you asking me, Tammy?
Yeah.
Anybody who
Oh,
knows?
sorry. Yeah, no, those are no longer in place, right? Because the level 2 requirements of most public agencies required that. And so, no, those aren't in place anymore because of all the rain.
But they're common sense for here.
Right. Common sense, but not absolute legal requirements. Unless this, I mean, of course, notwithstanding everything the governor has done and not done here, your board has authority to impose your own requirements in Borrego Springs among your customers if you want. So this is just the governor setting the minimum standards, but your board has the authority to do more if you want.
Jeff, do we contact overwaters? Like, you know, I think some of us have seen places in the river, for instance, where we have to drive to a sprinkler to go to somebody's house there. Do we contact them and talk to them about sprinklers? Just curious. I'm not an
In
activation.
terms of full disclosure, I'm kind of out of the loop on that level of communication. So I would say hopefully,
Yeah, we
Nancy
do.
would hear from me, but.
Generally, if there's a broken sprinkler, we get a call pretty quick from a member of the public, and Val does work with the crew to send someone out, make sure that it is some sort of leak or malfunctioning sprinkler, and then they do notify the area.
Sometimes are just set so that they don't stop at the edge, they keep going. So, anyway.
Right, so my comments would have been like what Jess was talking about, in terms of when we hear about it, here's what we do. But like I heard your question is when the guys are out there.
Well,
So I'm hoping
we'll
make sure to talk about it in our next.
and I'm not
But no, thank you. Like we just.
But it's like, hey, wouldn't it be worth a call to say, some of your sprinklers are watering your road?
I can't not look, right? I can't, yeah.
Well, it's community
The
water,
BSR
I mean,
again.
that's the bottom line.
The BSR again, they still got those.
Any other questions or comments for Steve or Jeff?
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
And, and perhaps and maybe it's been done before, but in the letter, or is there still a little letter that goes with the bill every month to say, common sense says, don't water at noon or something. Use your water wisely. I guess that's the message that I'd like to continue for everybody. And I think most residents recognize that it's kind of, not working in your favor if you try to water something at noon. But who knows? Any other comments or questions for that subject? Okay. Oh, any public comments? Thank you. Anybody want to talk about water conservation and drought? Yeah. Drought's over in Northern California.
Floods are on the way.
Snow melt's the next problem. All right, we'll go to section 2F, which is the Borrego Springs Subbasin Water Master Report.
Question, Tim.
Yeah. Yes.
It says authorize staff to proceed on this.
Oh.
I don't know if there was a recommended action.
Oh, I see that.
I'm not sure
Where?
what,
It's on the
Last one?
recommended action.
for the water drought update.
That might have been just a copy
Yeah,
and paste.
I copied the previous agenda.
All right, sorry, I just
How
want to make
about
sure we.
info noted?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Tina.
The agenda's longer though.
Yeah, item
You
2F.
did good.
So for the water master meeting that was just this last week, I sat in for Dave, who was on a very nice vacation to places where it really rains. And, it really rained. And it was, it was a pretty straightforward meeting. We had the conversation that took probably the most time was the conversation about the budget and the adjustments to the budget, which were ultimately approved. The conversation was about, and anyone else that was at the meeting can toss in with what I'm saying, but the question was, okay, so we're getting this $10 addition to our pumping fees, and we're at a bad part of our season to pay them, so, can we do something to make that easier for people to pay the bill? And so in the end, they voted to make it a 2-payment plan. So you could pay one payment in June and one payment in August, or something to that effect, and then without penalty. So after that was talked about, and they also, Samantha was also mentioned that, this additional fee will, go towards perhaps reducing the pumping fee for the following year. So I think that helped in getting it passed. So all the recommended budget amendments were approved. Does anybody remember anything else of note that happened? I think it was all.
There was that discussion about doing an analysis.
Oh, the annual reports. And we were looking at the fact that some of the concerns that we had about following the data on water quality and actually doing some analysis of the data as it was required was put into the report. And there was some discussion about whether that was really necessary or not. When I asked Andy about annual analysis of the data that was coming in, he did say that he didn't think it was really necessary, that that a year-to-year analysis was not going to show that much. And he basically did say that they would be looking at, trends, because the data would be there. They would be looking at trends, and they could take action to mitigate undesirable results if they saw something happening. Did I have that right?
Yeah, but so there was a term, I don't remember if it was Bayesian analysis, that was going to be like super analysis and more expensive. And Andy, I think, implied or said that they'll be monitoring every 6 months, and they'll be looking at the data. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's not like a full-fledged analysis, but he thought that if there something alarming showed up, it would be caught.
Right. And the reason it was discussed is the cost for doing analysis. There was some feeling that they needed to be mindful of costs. So and then of course the thing that we talked about, the GDE, the end of that came with the director's comments at the end when Mark wanted to recommend that the GDE study go. He wanted to present it to the environmental working group, and that kind of died on the table. So that's the reason for the next meeting agenda. Gina.
Yeah, a couple of things to add on the water quality. They did say that they would be releasing the results of this monitoring every 6 months.
Yes.
Which was, I think, then will allow other people to kind of take a look at them.
Right. And I think that's a good thing, because we'll all have a chance to look at it and have input.
And then the other thing I noticed is that the letter we wrote was not addressed as part of that report. Only comments from the TAC were addressed in the report, or responses to comments. So I'm not sure how a member of the public or anyone else would be able to take information to the Water Master Board and provide meaningful input if they hadn't gone to the TAC meeting.
I think that's a big issue.
Yes, I mean, it was a challenge. The only comments I saw from BWD were Trey's comments. So, and I think there was that deadline because it had to be submitted by the 8th. That's why the meeting was held on the 6th. But it doesn't really allow for input in my thoughts. I'm sorry.
To add on to that, Gina, the meeting before, when Andy presented, we're going to do the groundwater management monitoring plan in the next meeting, and he's saying, and you, the board, Water Master Board, can direct us, the staff, to respond to public comments. In addition to our requirement, we, the staff, to respond to TAC comments. The board did not authorize the staff to respond to comments from the public. And so therefore, in the next meeting, the staff didn't do it. And no one in that previous meeting recommended, suggested, followed up on Andy saying, we, the staff, just tell us to go do it and we'll do it. And no one on the board told them.
We're talking about the annual report,
No,
right?
we're talking about the groundwater management monitoring plan that got voted on in the last meeting.
It does have all of the submitted written comments and staff replies.
And the annual.
Oh, okay, all right, yes, I'm doing.
Annual report,
I'm
yes.
mixing up.
The groundwater monitoring report, the BWD did this work because the Water Master meeting prior, there was no direction to staff to respond to public comment. Staff didn't respond to public comment, so analysis of data collected. Really, there was not much commitment on exactly what analysis was going to be done. Words from Andy and sort of nothing from the board. So I don't even know if Andy would be permitted to do what I don't completely have confidence that Andy feels like he has the billable hours to do analysis.
I felt that there was a walk back on what they put in the report. And then that's why I asked the questions I did. Once he responded to that, there was nothing else. It just went on. So I think that is another thing that we just need to watch. And I think that the fact that they will publish, we'll make sure that we ask if they don't publish it, that the results of the testing every 6 months or whatever comes out, that we take a look at that ourselves. So all we can do is stay on top of things at this point. And
I was looking at the Sigma actual text yesterday in connection with something else, and I have to acknowledge that there is a little section on the annual reports, and it just talks about reporting elevation data and groundwater storage, and I forget, and it doesn't mention quality monitoring. So
Which
I
is
think,
which is the point that they made initially when they were
Right.
doing the annual report, that we are following what it says is required in the annual report.
so in order to get at that, though, I think we have to start saying, wait a minute, there are projects and management actions that are supposed to be happening. I think we need to go at it anyway, although we need to discuss that and see what Steve recommends, et cetera. But that might be a more effective route.
Yeah, we'll talk about more about that at another time. Any other comments, questions, Water Master related? Trey, I know you're out there. Do you have anything to add in terms of the board meeting or the technical advisory committee activities?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so actually currently filling out the request for information from the Borrego Springs Water Master website for last week they finished their spring sampling for water quality. It takes about 2 or 3 weeks to get that data from the lab, but proactively requesting both the water quality data and also the model files, so the updated model files, so we can start our review of those documents. So that's what's ongoing. I think that you captured the conversation of the Water Master meeting well. I did have some concerns about not looking at the data in detail annually, especially as we begin to continue the ramp down in the basin. There's potential for water quality to be more variable than in the past. So I think it's something we just need to, as the water district, keep a close eye on. So thank you, President.
Thank you, Trey.
Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Trey? We appreciate your being here today and staying on top of what's happening. Diane, you have a comment?
So Trey, you just used the word proactively, which caught my ear. It always sounds good. You already put in a request to the Water Master for that data as soon as they have it. Is that what you mean?
That's correct. I requested the data via email a couple weeks ago, and they came back, and there's now a form on the Borrego Springs Water Master website, request for information. They asked that I fill that out for their formal documentation, doing that right now, and we'll submit that on behalf of the Borrego Water District 2, and I'll copy Jeff to request the release of information. And that would be both the model files, the Borrego Valley hydrologic model files that they've updated, and all of the water quality data collected by the Water Master to date.
And so are you going to try to at least eyeball it enough to see if there's anything that really catches your eye so that BWD can, and report that to BWD so we can maybe talk about it at the next Water Master meeting? We keep falling a month behind basically because of the language.
Yeah, Diane, unfortunately, I think because it takes about 3 weeks to get the most recent data, which I would like to analyze as part of the water quality scope of work you approved the last board meeting. I think we are going to fall a month behind again here, but we're going to more than just eyeball it. We're going to look at it statistically and see if there are any changing trends and report back to you on that.
And I think that's fair. I don't think that having a water quality report right off the bat makes a huge amount of difference.
No, that's
We'd rather have the study and this analysis done so that we can understand it. So, thank you, Trey. Appreciate it. And Tammy has a question for you.
Yeah, just based on a comment you made about the model and the dropping of the water level, I just don't know this. Does the model predict where our water level table will be at the end of the 20-year ramp down? Is that one of its outputs?
Yes, when the model was updated, we did assume a reduction in pumping, which was a little bit different than the current 5% per year for the first 10 years. It was more of a linear rate over the entire 20 years, but it does predict where the groundwater levels would be. And we use those predictions to help develop the minimum thresholds for the basin.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Gina?
And just a quick question, probably for Jeff and for Trey. We don't have any, the Water Master doesn't have any other reports or anything due that we need to provide comments on before the next meeting or anything.
No.
I just want to try to stay on top of that.
Yeah, our biggest challenge right now is with the GP report.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Trey.
Sure, and I'll just add that I'll keep you updated on the next TAC meeting. It hasn't been calendared yet, but they were mentioning May, June at the last call. So I'll keep all of you updated on when that occurs.
Okay.
Thank you, President Dice.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate you getting back to us on all the things that we're interested in. And I think Water Master did say that they're going to have an in-person meeting in either May or June.
Probably June.
Okay, thank you. Is there any comments from the public on this topic of the Water Master meeting? All right, we're going to go down then to section 3, the board committee reports as needed. Does anybody have anything to report on either the standing or the ad hoc committees? We've been working, Gina and I and Jessica and Jeff have been continuing to work on the budget. We hope to present sometime soon, next month maybe. You know, we were looking hardest at the fact that our reserves, we're going to take a hit over the next couple of years, but for good reasons. We were trying to look at ways to reduce that, to not get quite that skinny on reserves. But other than that, our budget is looking good. Obviously, costs keep going up, and we have to look at that. And you know, that's par for the course, but I think the budget, you will be satisfied with what you see when it's presented, hopefully next month. Any other reports for standing or ad hoc? Go ahead, Tammy.
On cybersecurity, those of you who were around, you didn't have to go before you came. Government agency called CISA did a free cybersecurity risk evaluation of our IT infrastructure. We have asked them to do the same for our OT, our SCADA network. And we, Jessica, are just very early in the process to evaluate whether that makes sense, but it's possible we will get another free cybersecurity evaluation, which is always a really good thing. So it's great news. They will also do what they call OT.
Especially since these days they can have to.
Is that operations technology? That's OT.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Yes.
On public engagement, Kathy and I will be speaking at the annual meeting of the Borrego Valley Stewardship Council tomorrow night, and talking very briefly, talking about all the Prop 68 stuff that's happening. So.
Yeah, we need to talk before that, so that I understand what my part in that is. We've talked before, but it's like, now that I've seen the slides that are going to be presented, okay. Anyway, yes, and anyone who is available or interested at 5:30 on Thursday, Wednesday. Tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow at 5:30 at the library if you want to be there in person, or you can also Zoom in. is the annual meeting of the Borrego Valley Stewardship Council, where they talk about what they've done, what they plan to do. There's an election of representatives. So in it, they're talking about community planning. It's going to be, I think they've got some really interesting topics. So please attend if you're able. Any other reports from committees? All right, then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff for his manager's report.
Boy. Let's see. I think I had grants listed on there.
I have Grant and Fortner.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, there we go.
Jeff and Kathy, would you take a public comment on the committee
I'm
report?
sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to report, I don't think this has come up at a meeting since we had it, but we T2 met with Tammy and Dave and had an excellent meeting on moving forward, in particular with sewer capacity. And so I just wanted to thank them for that meeting. And they spoke to us about what came up today about the BWD study at the wastewater treatment plant. And so we look forward to the updated information from Dudek so that we can all be on the same page about capacity and next steps. And that affects our development, but also, all of Borrego and the sewer ratepayers in particular. So Tammy and Dave, I know that I owe you some information, and I plan to get you an update yet this week on our sewer connections at Rams Hill, and also wanted to thank Jessica for her work on that as we work together to figure out those numbers.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. I think this will fit the entire community, including Rams Hill. So I'm looking forward to it as well. And thank you, everyone, for all of your work on these various topics. Anybody else? Anybody else from the public? Sorry, I forgot to ask that. So back to Jeff.
Okay, in terms of the Fortner well sampling, the board directed staff to work with legal counsel on communicating with the property owner, so that letter has been sent. I see the demand letter. We have the rights to monitor your well. Please call us, and we're going to do that. I did try one more time, via email and phone, just to make sure there's no response. And was that literally a boop, beep, boop when you call, and then this isn't even an email address when you send them an email to the address. So the
I
letters don't
sense
have,
that we're being blocked.
or just totally
They've left.
unaware.
Is there a timeline? At what point will BWD go out and collect a sample with the sheriff in tow if needed?
Excellent question, Steve. We had some days in the letter. I let Steve kind of handle that one, honestly. So Steve, do you remember what our timeline was, and what would you recommend be our next steps if we don't hear back?
Yeah, I think we gave them a couple of weeks, if I'm remembering right, Jeff. I'm trying to find that letter right now.
14
To
days,
get back to us, we didn't want to be too in your face, although we were a little aggressive in our letter. So I think we gave them a couple of weeks and told them if we didn't hear back from them in a couple of weeks that we'd do what we needed to do.
So is it clear that what we need to do is we're going to tromp on over to their property and cut the chain link fence block and go?
I don't think we can do that. Yeah, I'll talk to Steve about that. But
We might be
yeah,
able
we
to
could.
walk
Yeah.
onto the property.
Plus, I just don't know if we can physically collect a sample. I don't know the status of the well. Is
So we
there
gotta
power
go-
to it? And there's a lot of
So
complicating
basically, you have to go
factors.
examine the well first. See what's going on.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
There was a sense of urgency expressed in the last meeting by dear Dave
Right.
about collecting a sample for all the reasons that we talked about last time and that how important this well is. And so
It
it's
sounds like we're too late for the
pushing a
spring.
little on this to just drive to a sample sooner. Thank you.
It's just, well, those are tough questions, like, oh my God, am I really gonna cut the lock and go out there? But no, I'm just saying, they're great questions. My brain has just been elsewhere. So yeah, just like, oh, okay. It's hitting me now. Like, okay.
When we sample, and we have a sample, will then that be turned over to the water master for analysis, or then will we send it off to run?
I'd like to just get it done, so I would probably recommend just doing it ourselves. I send it to the water master, who knows how long it's gonna sit there, and do they need approval from somebody to accept it? I don't, those are all excellent questions.
I think it would be
My
interesting.
team has those written down. I will get to the file.
Interesting to do it ourselves and then submit it.
But you're right, we're to that point to where we have to know the answer, so, yeah. I've got 12 days, or 11 days. But no, I'm not laughing, it's serious,
The other
I need to
question
go.
is how long does the well need to run before you can take a sample? It is my understanding that you can't just sample the standing water in the well that the well has to run.
Once again, it gets back to I don't know the exact status of the well, obviously, does it have power now, is it still being used? Do you think it's a production well that's being used for the house?
Given the results of the last test, why would you drink that?
Yeah.
I mean, really, why would you drink that?
They may not, they may drink bottled and just use it for showers.
Who knows?
Do you know, Dave, if, I'm trying, oh, Kathy, in the budget amendment for the water master was $5,000 to coordinate with BWD, like water quality, groundwater sampling techniques. Which get to like, would they accept our water quality sample if we follow their approved techniques? Do you know? Did that $5,000 get approved so we can clear with Andy?
I think that was, kind of in total of the budget.
I remember that.
That would be I think it said cooperation. Yeah, right.
Because then Andy, as long as we clear with Andy, this is how we do our sample, he can officially accept it in. He's been given direction by the board to spend those hours. I think it was approved.
If it was part of the budget, then it was approved.
Everything in the budget was approved. There was nothing to take it back out.
All right, so Andy should be able to talk to you about it.
And I'll talk to maybe Trey's probably the most qualified about what do I really need to check to go out there and make sure he can use it. I'll get to those logistical. No, between, that. So I'll talk to you, Trey, about what might be the next logical steps to be able to sample the former well. Like, what should I do? Should I go out there and look at stuff? Anyway, I'll talk to you, Trey, later today.
It would be interesting if those folks even were aware of the results of the last
You
sample.
might appreciate it, hearing from us. You get the info, yeah.
That,
You would think they would have had it tested.
Well, I remember Trey telling us that you get people when, like a year or so ago, maybe longer, and were turned away. So those owners do know that, that there's some questions about water, or, that
What they do about it is up to them.
Right.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Kathy Milkey typed in we have a chat comment requesting to take 2 samples, one for DWD analysis and one for water master analysis, and hope they are consistent.
We'll take it under advisement.
Is that cool, Porter?
Yeah.
Let's talk grants. Okay, so I was mentioning that I had been speaking to my friend Joseph at the water boards about the bottlenecks grant, right? The first half of that phone call was about something I hadn't forgotten about, but something we have been waiting for, and that is budget increase for our tank replacement, right? The original budget going way back was like 1.6 million. Then David Dale came on board and updated all the estimates and included a lot of engineering and stuff that went beyond just construction. So that was great, and they expanded the estimate, and what was included in the initial final budget agreement
And the material cost.
increase in material cost was 2.1 million. That was and so that estimate was developed just before the COVID crisis and supply chain shortages and all that. And so we knew that it was going to be more, that the bids were going to be more. And so we let the state know, and the state said, just go ahead and submit the documents. And then as part of our final review, in essence, you get one more bite at the apple. And so we would be eligible for a budget increase. The exact same thing happened on our wastewater treatment plant. The engineer's estimate was 455,000. It came in at 778,000, and the state ultimately funded the difference. So going back, almost a year, the state staff's position was, kind of, maybe they didn't use the word don't worry, but they said, it seems like there's money there for the budget increase, so submit the papers and we'll start the process. And that was literally a long time ago, 8-9 months ago. And so the first half of the call was from the state to say, Jeff, we're getting real close to wrapping up the final business agreement. And we want to talk to the state parks folks about the progress you've made on the twin tanks. So if you remember, we had a slick application, everything was cool, except we don't own the property where the twin tanks are located. Obviously, state parks doesn't like that, and state grants doesn't like that either. They want to make sure that you own the property that they're going to fund a grant to finance the construction of, right? It's pretty important. So if you recall, the ultimate transaction will be what's called a land swap between the district and the state. But that takes 2 years, and we wanted to get the tank done now because that tank was in, those 2 tanks were in the worst shape of all of them. So we signed a lease agreement that in essence buys us the time needed to do the construction. It provides the temporary easements and everything else needed to replace the tank as part. And then so we can get the tanks done. Then once the land swap is done, we can then submit all of our documents to the state for reimbursement for the expenses to replace the tanks. Okay. So step 1 is the lease. And lease, and then the question was, are you going to actually start construction now, Jeff, or not? Or are you going to wait until the land swap is done? The state just forgot the whole point of the lease was to allow us to start before, but that's cool. That was a fair question. The good news is I have great answers for everything. And then what progress are you making on the land swap? Perfect. Over the 2 years, Sandy Trifan from the Sandy Trippin from the state has morphed into this unknown beast who's the one person who controls all state land acquisitions in the entire state of California. And boy, it takes forever to work with this person. Good luck, kind of good luck with this. And he's now become kind of our best friend. Super, super nice guy. Calls me almost weekly. More than that, if needed, helped us a lot. There was some numbering problem with the agreement we had with them, the lease agreement. It was the wrong division in state parks nomenclature. So Sandy had a complicated way to fix it or an easy way to fix it. He selected the easy way. Just, anyway, he's really working hard to try to streamline this whole process. And although this changing the number was just a small little change, it was just the way he handled it was perfect. I mean, he's really on BWD's side of doing everything he can to make sure this land swap gets done. So the state wanted to talk to Sandy just to make sure that we're meeting our end of the obligation to where the state can feel comfortable to give us the grant increase, right? So theoretically, if we had made no progress with the state, if we still didn't have the lease agreement, if we hadn't hired a contractor, if we'd done nothing, the state might be saying, you might not get the extra money you need just because you're not making the progress you promised to make. And if we were waiting to start the tank construction, we probably couldn't get it done before the time the grant runs out, because we have the 3-year ticking time bomb, and that runs out in March, end of March in 2025. Okay, so we have to have all the projects done by then. So the news that I had to share with my friend at the state, that the state grants staff was, please call Sandy, because he's once again, he's our best friend. He's doing everything. We have the entire lease agreement done. The state might be expecting, no, we're still negotiating the lease agreement, blah, blah, blah. But no, it's all done, completely signed. Kathy signed that months ago. And that's done. And so then the next question kind of pertained to the land swap. And have you done everything associated with the land swap? And we have. We had extra appraisals done. We had appraisals done of some property in Akatia Wells that the state is going to accept as part of the land transfer because we need more land at Twin Tanks than we owned. So there was a delta between what we need and what we own, and obviously what we need is greater than what we currently own, so we had to make up the difference and offer other land that we own that was totally surrounded by state parkland, which could have potentially been the unicorn in this whole thing. And how do we find a piece of property that's completely surrounded by state parkland that the state park doesn't already own? Well, we actually have one. Somebody donated it years and years ago, and it's on the way to the state park ranger station. So, and there was maybe some questions on whether they would accept it, but the good news is the Borrego folks accepted land that's over there by the ranger station for the Akatia Wells area. So we've done it all. Then in terms of the question of, are you going to wait to start construction before you get the land swap done, which was the question from our state grants folks, is boy, we are not waiting at all. We bid it. The tank's been demolished. The tank reconstruction was literally beginning the day I was talking to my friend Joseph at State Grant. So we have done everything. Done the lease agreement fully signed, done everything needed for the land swap. Started, not only are we going to build it, we are building it, bid it, started construction, physically started the demo. Demo's done, we're rebuilding the tank as we speak. So I could not have given the state any better answers to get them to feel comfortable to sign the final business agreement. And there was no reason for Sandy, and Joseph wanted to talk to Sandy separate, which that's cool, because I'm confident that we've done everything right. Sandy will only tell him nothing but good stuff. So Joseph was talking to Sandy. Like I say, there's no bad news that can come from Sandy on this whole transaction, so I fully expect for us to get the green light and ultimately the extra $800,000 to finish it. I think that was really, really good news. And then he finished, then the second half of the call was, oh, by the way, you qualify for the bottleneck grant at the wastewater treatment plant. Almost fell over backwards in my chair. Once again, super, super important for our cash flow. $1 million here, $1 million there. What's up? It really does add up, and it really does make a big impact to our cash flow. So if we can, avoid having to charge our ratepayers for this stuff, we're what, at $9 million down, so get a couple more, and that's 11-ish million, 12 million. It's starting to get crazy what we're doing out here. And then, as I mentioned last time, the ISA Padilla project that requires 20% match. But since we're SDF, we can apply for a waiver of the 20% for the next coming months. Once something budget related comes out, there's some federal action that's needed before we can ask to get the 20% waived. So as soon as that happens, we'll be all over asking to get the 20% waived, because that's $800,000 in next year's cash. Because it's $4.5 million, and 20% of that's 800 and change, and that's literally in Jessica's cash flow for next year. So we get that wiped out, get the bottleneck grant, get the increase in the tank grant, maybe get another Feinstein, ISA, or Padilla this year for next year. Oh, and then get the BPA acquired land deals done.
I think what this little district has been able to accomplish is
Pretty crazy.
Would it be worth you two reporting on Paul
Oh, I'm gonna do that.
Constance's visit?
I'm gonna do that first, but thank you for reminding me. I totally forgot. I was gonna say that first, but then we got distracted. I think as I reported in our last meeting, I think it was like the next day, right? Or 2 days later, Paul Gosselin, the assistant director of DWR, Mr. Sigma, was coming out for a face-to-face. Diane and Kathy and I hung out for a good, hour and a half here. I couldn't picture a more qualified, easy to talk to guy who kind of totally grasps what's going on out here, totally got it, and was super impressed with what we're doing. And you might see more of not more, but some honking of the BWD horn at the state level in terms of what's happening in terms of Sigma. Because Paul's dealing with the problems. The basins that aren't even starting their plan and do need intervention, and he sees a lot of the other end of the spectrum that's possible, so to understand that there's a district that's done what we've done, but not only just being the first to submit our plan, and then do the victory lap with the judgment and the adjudication of the water master, and 2 years of ramp down, and everybody being metered. Yada, yada, yada. It's pretty incredible what's happening. So you might be part of an interview, or who knows, something in the future with DWR wanting to talk more about the success. Super, super impressed. Because he really hadn't heard, which was kind of the point, honestly, because we're so isolated and small, and honestly doesn't have a relationship with anybody at DWR. Got a couple now with the grant folks, but there's nobody I know we can talk to. But because we are so isolated, and don't go to all the meetings, and run across these people in the hallways or conventions or anything, we are just isolated souls. The meeting could not have gone any better. Paul's aware of the GDE issue with the water master and he just wasn't quite prepared to give me advice on exactly what to do in terms of how to get this information to DWR. So I didn't want to put him on the spot, ask him a question at the last minute. create more questions because of his answer. So
He did
Paul's
say-
aware, and probably is going to come back with the just deal with the system and so, work with the water master and the judge. That there's probably nothing that DWR can do unilaterally. But like I said, I didn't want to officially quote him on anything.
Two additional things. He did say we should be seeing the DWR report on our GMP.
This month,
sometime
April.
this month, so we'll see what happens there. The second thing was that I thought was really nice was that he actually brought his wife down here to have a little holiday of just checking out the park, which I thought was great because that showed some interest in not just the basin, but, you know, the whole area. So, and he went on a, Jeff took him on a tour.
Just looked at everything.
So,
Oh, we drove by the TSS well, and the gal was there who was doing the final water quality sampling. They got the turbidity down to 0, which means, okay, we're not pumping junk anymore. We are actually in the groundwater basin, so they were literally pulling the samples as Paul and I were sitting in the van looking at them. It just, what was kind of weird in a good way was every person that was part of that TSS project were so excited to be in Borrego. Like, no joke, it was, they kind of heard of it, and all wanted to be there, and the fact that the flowers were, I mean, couldn't have picked a better setting, but like,
they were in one of
this girl was just giddy. It was weird, like, okay, I didn't ask her to do it, but she wasn't doing it just because the boss was there, but she was so excited to be there. And then we had a DUDEC employee who came out to do the environmental review on the William Bauer, and so excited to be there and wanted to spend extra time. I almost brought a roommate out because the roommate wanted to go to Borrego real bad. And
So
there was just so much interest in this weird mystique about Borrego.
A lot of it has to do with social media.
Just
the girl who was excited, was she DWR or?
the first one, the sampler at the TSS well?
uh,
Yeah.
DWR?
Yeah. DWR employee and then the DUDEC employee was a kind of entry level biologist who came out to do the survey on the William Bauer person.
Probably excited to be out of their house.
Environmental site assistant.
Was that someone?
Get out of the rain.
The DWR office in Glendale or wherever?
They were talking, her and Paul were talking about where they're from. I didn't think of it.
Just good to know who relates to us for schmoozing in the future.
We got Paul. Paul's on our side for sure.
It's nice to have these positive aspects of, you know, wanting to come to Borrego. Gina, did you have a question? Okay.
And it's a great story. I mean, it is a great story. Like, what's happened out there? Mind boggling.
I think that we are accomplishing some of the things that they, you know, Sigma is all about, so.
We're probably the only one that's done it, right? That's done everything that was in the Sigma
There's some that will still be in the adjudication.
poster child for sustainability. How do I do it, Madam President?
Okay, well, it is 11:28. And we need to go into closed session. So how about we reconvene at 11:35? Does that work for everybody? Give you a chance to stretch. Facilities. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to go into closed session. And thank you. Our next meeting will be April 25th, 9 a.m. here at BWD. Thank you.